What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. VP Tactical here. Today I want to talk to you folks a little bit about ammo types. So specifically, there's always been a long-standing debate around brass versus steel, and then there's some outliers out there too, as well as aluminum. I just want to talk a little bit about that and kind of give you some of my synopsis and some things that I found based on my own research. So maybe be some information that you might be able to use for the future, make your own decisions. Definitely appreciate all of the love and support. If you really like my content, definitely hit that like and subscribe button, that little bell as well. That way you'll know as soon as I post new content. Appreciate you being part of the squad, especially those who are already with me. And then anybody else that chooses to join along, appreciate you as well. And so again, to talk a little bit about the different ammo types. You'll see here I've actually got some shotgun shells. These by definition wouldn't necessarily be considered brass versus steel. I think this actually probably is aluminum here on these 12 gauge shells, and this one's brass. And we'll talk a little bit about these ones here in just a little bit. Now, for my purposes in this conversation, primarily focusing on brass versus steel. This is a 223 aka 556. This is actually a 3030, but it actually is so dulled because it's so old that it looks similar to steel. So that's what I'm using it for my reference. You can kind of see, usually your steel is going to be much darker. It's going to be a much rougher finish on it unless it actually has a coating, which we'll dive a little bit into that. This is actually a 556 tracer. So this at least kind of give you some background on those. But what's the difference between brass versus steel? Brass ammo is generally considered better than steel because it generally creates a better seal in the chamber, and that's because it's malleable. And because of that too, because it creates a better seal, you're going to get less blowback into the chamber, so your gun's going to get less dirty in general. And so you can imagine, with steel, that's definitely going to give you more malfunctions due to carbon buildup, so on and so forth. But that doesn't necessarily mean that rifle shooting steel-cased ammo is going to be more or less reliable in the long run. There are some major differences too, especially when you get some of the older, foreign ammo that you might pick up from overseas, military ammo, especially the stuff that's sealed in container, like these little like Spam containers. Those primers may be real hard to ignite, especially on that older ammo. So that's something to keep in mind too. But it's also, I think a lot of it's based on the gun that you're running and shooting. Some guns generally run better on steel, like for example AK-47s or FALs. Doesn't necessarily mean they won't run better or worse with brass, but there's always a probability when you get guns that have a really strong extraction cycle that they might rip the head off of the brass because it is softer, and it's because of that more aggressive cycle that it's possible it could rip it off in general, whereas a steel, it's much less malleable, so less probability that that's going to happen. Now, all that being said, it's always also possible too, so we talk about, brass being malleable, which basically allows it to be more conformed to the chamber and expand, versus steel. Steel's, it's always a possibility that it may get stuck because it is less malleable. If it expands, even though this bed, conforms to the chamber, that might make it very difficult to actually get out. So something to keep in mind. But both have both serve their purposes. Steel does make for great planking, and it's cheap. Just as brass makes for great planking too, but you're typically going to find it at more expensive cost. So that's something to keep in mind. But another thing to consider too, if you ever plan to reload, steel generally can't, more or less shouldn't be reloaded, just given the fact that it isn't as malleable. Those tolerances, especially when it comes to reloading, you want to make sure that everything is spot on. So, and part of that too, with brass, it's generally a lot more slick. Steel, and again, this is just my example of steel, given that I didn't have any steel around still that I could find, so that stuff goes so quick. But nonetheless, and it's actually all been bought up, given everything that's going on right now. I can't get a hold of it. But usually they'll have some sort of coating, and it may be like a Teflon or some sort of special coating to actually help it extract, and so that way it actually doesn't get stuck in there, and also to avoid rusting. So that's a big factor too as well. And something interesting, when I was out at the Ben Avery gun range when we were shooting some trap and skeet, I had picked up some of these Remingtons, and I also had some Winchester AA's. And what's interesting about these, even with these, and I believe, like I said, this is aluminum from my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you do know otherwise, go ahead and throw it down in the comment section. Versus our brass here. I noticed a lot of times that these heads actually end up getting ripped off. And versus the brass, the brass, I don't think I've really had much of a problem with ever. I don't think I've ever seen a head rip off of a brass shell. So, this can happen even with your ammo with shotgun shells. So, again, depending upon what you're shooting, whether it's pistol, shotgun, rifle, choose what's best for you. And if you would, in the comments below, drop what you like to shoot better, and why. I'd love to hear, your guys' feedback and just a little bit of information about, what your experiences are, what you shoot on a consistent basis. If you noticed any major differences between them, if you happen to switch back and forth between brass versus steel or even aluminum, definitely love to hear those comments. Hopefully this was at least an informative video for you. Definitely hit that like and subscribe button, along with that little bell. That way, again, you know what's going on. Be safe, stay vigilant, and just want to say thank you again for all the love and support. Have a great rest of your week.